People, what is the most thing you have ever done? Story 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it, for heaven's sake. One night I woke up because she was shouting for me in that nasally trill she always had that I'd grown to hate because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name, over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So I thought some very angry choice words at her and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured there, now mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, it turns out her kidneys had shut down acutely. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, yelling for me, not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was 85. That 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference. But she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. Story 2. I'm a recovered hero addict, 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a bad person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day I was flat broke and on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had medical insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by, and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt. Just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big cinder block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block, trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it. Psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he said okay. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to hold it up higher and drop it again, which he did. So I went to the hospital and told them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom step. I went back, got x-rays, and sat in the waiting room. The doctor came in and told me that I'd torn numerous ligaments in my foot and that it probably would have hurt less if I'd just broken my foot. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking, yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I might get something. They released me and handed me a prescription for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Story 3. I'm going to rat my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been seeing the counselor on the side for her own personal benefit. Still not confirmed. So we were upset because we loved both our mom and dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it was tough watching him get torn down by the only 2 adult figures who were supposed to care about him. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in the counselor's office, and she decided to assert dominance by taking a dump in his trash can. Dominance was definitely asserted. Story 4. This was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, my boyfriend and his family, got Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason, this night it didn't sit well with me. An hour after eating, I got that intensely sick feeling, like you have to go to the bathroom so badly that you might throw up. Whatever. I went upstairs and destroyed the bathroom. It's important to note there are 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, where my boyfriend and I stayed in a little apartment-like setup. After I was sure my bowels were empty, I went back downstairs to lay in bed, thinking I could sleep it off. Nope. About 30 seconds after lying down, I got the urge to go again. I ran upstairs, and to my horror, both bathrooms were occupied. His sister refused to get out of the shower, even though I told her it was an emergency, and his dad was in the other bathroom, suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly went back to bed and tried to think of options as the bubbling in my gut got worse. Bust down the bathroom door, make the 30-minute drive home, No, it was too urgent. I even considered the ultimate embarrassment of having an accident, but I really didn't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I realized my only option was to go outside. Their yard was very open and it was a bright moonlit night, so there was nowhere to go without feeling exposed, except under the trampoline. I figured no one had used the trampoline for years, and it was out of sight enough to avoid anyone stepping in it. So I did my business, got soaked in the rain pouring off the trampoline, cleaned up with napkins and wet wipes, and came back inside. I immediately threw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, and sickness. I cleaned that up and went to bed. Everything was fine for a few days until my boyfriend's dad casually mentioned how he was late for work one morning. Apparently the dog had rolled in some poop and needed a bath. I wanted to throw up all over again, but thankfully everyone assumed it was some type of animal poop. Story 5. Picking up a dude's head that fell off his rotting corpse when I worked at a mortuary transport company is definitely up there. Also, picking up a 5-year-old kid who had a bookcase fall on him. Feeling all the broken bones moving in his tiny body messed me up badly. If we're talking behavior, I definitely attempted to ruin friends' relationships in my teenage years because I was a bitter and lonely person. Seeing them happy only made me feel worse. So I wanted to drag them down to my level. Luckily, their relationships were stronger than my nonsense in most cases. Edit. I've gotten a few messages asking about the mortuary job and whether or not these were the worst calls I've had, so I figured I'd share an old comment from another thread. Trigger warning for suicide. I witnessed a woman completely break down over the headless body of her son. I used to work for a mortuary livery service. Most of the time, I picked up bodies from retirement homes or houses with hospice care. But occasionally I'd get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call nearby where the place was surrounded by cops. They led me and my partner to a bathroom where a guy had blown his head off with a shotgun in the shower. It was a mess, as you'd imagine, but by then it wasn't unusual for me. I'd picked up suicides before, as well as overdoses, decompositions, kids, so I was mostly numb to it. We got the guy into a bag, loaded him onto the gurney, and headed out at the worst possible time. The guy's mother was outside, having just arrived. She started screaming hysterically the moment she saw us, and it immediately put me on edge. I was used to dealing with grieving loved ones, but her blood-curdling screams were a first. A cop tried to hold her back, but she broke free and collapsed onto the gurney, sobbing uncontrollably. She was rocking back and forth so hard that I had to grab the gurney to keep it from tipping over. For 5 minutes, I stood there, face to face with raw, unfiltered agony, unable to do anything. Eventually, the cops managed to pull her away, saying we had to take him. We loaded the body into the car and went about our work as usual. That night stayed with me because it felt like looking into my own future. I was suicidal at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I'd planned to do it. The only thing stopping me was wanting to wait until I had my own place so my roommate wouldn't find me. The guy was even my age. Seeing that woman's breakdown made me realize I couldn't do that to my own mom. While I still struggle with those feelings, that night was when I decided I'd never go through with it. Ironically, it made things harder. Before, I felt like I had an out, a way to escape the pain. Now I just feel trapped, unable to live but unable to die. Story 6. My hometown is mostly middle class to poor, with a few rich folks living out in the woods. One of those rich kids went to our high school and bullied everyone who wasn't wealthy. He grew up to be the same kind of jerk and bought a Camaro last summer, removing the muffler so it was the loudest car in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he ruined a town tradition by driving laps around the common during the tree lighting ceremony, drowning out the carolers and everyone giving thanks. Last summer, my friend and I decided it was time for revenge. My friend's dad owned a junkyard, and they had recently gotten an old train horn from a busted diesel engine. We spent a week installing it on the back of his work truck and waited for the perfect opportunity. A month later, we heard the guy was hosting a party for his family and some wealthy friends. We didn't know what the occasion was, but we parked just outside his fence and blasted the train horn as the party started. Then we peeled out before anyone could stop us. Later, we found out the party we interrupted was a wake for his late grandfather. Story 7. Sometimes you can do terrible things without intending to. I was in a relationship with a wonderful woman who was struggling with physical health issues that caused severe depression. We didn't live together, but I made a habit of visiting her in the mornings for breakfast and to check in. One night, I went out drinking with friends and overslept the next morning. I called her to let her know I wouldn't make it. That day, while I was at work, she took her own life. I know now that her decision wasn't my fault. Everyone makes their own choices. Still, I'll always wish I hadn't overslept that morning. If I could change one thing in my life, it would be that. Story 8. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons. I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons I was in such a bad place emotionally was that my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I watched someone I loved dearly lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. He was young, just 50 years old. There was some hope in the beginning, but glioblastoma is a terminal brain cancer, so the outcome was almost certain. The day I stopped drinking was the day I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check-in. It was a big responsibility, one his wife would normally handle, and the only time I was asked to step in. I had helped him in other ways, like keeping him company when he was alone, but this was different. I drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meeting time. He went to the appointment anyway and reassured me that everything was okay, knowing his battle was nearly over. But I can't forgive myself for that. Even now, typing this out makes me feel like the worst person. I wish I'd been sober then. Story 9. One time, a girl I had minimal interest in, though we had mutual friends, sent me a text saying, "I have feelings for you, and I'd like to explore where that takes us." I panicked. I wasn't into her and dreaded the idea of turning her down, as I'm a people pleaser and hate rejecting others. I know how much rejection hurts, and I didn't want to do that to her. So I typed out a message to a close friend. "Please kill me now, I think she wants a relationship." Unfortunately, you can probably guess what happened. I accidentally sent it to her instead. The second I realized my mistake, I scrambled for a way to explain or apologize, but nothing could salvage it. I sent her a long message explaining that it wasn't meant to be mean and that she didn't deserve that, but it didn't matter. I still cringe about it to this day. Story 10. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a care company that provided support to elderly people in their homes. I met many memorable people, but my favorite was Joyce. Joyce was in her 80s, and despite my chaotic home life, we clicked. She was a genuinely cool person to be around. I'd visit her during my breaks, making her tea and sandwiches, and we'd sit together smoking cheap cigarettes. She'd share stories about her late husband building their home and how she made dresses for trans women and men who just wanted to wear dresses. "Who cares?" she'd say, "as long as you're not hurting anyone." Joyce had daughters who rarely visited. She once told me they had dropped off Christmas dinner in Tupperware for her to heat up, and I couldn't understand why she wasn't invited to their table. Another carer, whom she trusted, broke her heart when she found out he had been stealing from her. She asked me to promise that if I ever left my job, I'd let her know and come to see her anyway. I assured her I would. But one night, I had a medical emergency and was rushed to the hospital during my shift. I was unable to work for months and never saw her again. I thought about visiting her many times but always hesitated. First, it was because I was recovering, then because I was in an abusive relationship, and later because I worried too much time had passed. What if she didn't recognize me? Or worse, what if she had passed away? It's been 12 years and it still gnaws at me. I regret not keeping my promise. Story 11. When I was 16, my father sent me to a behavior modification program in Jamaica called Tranquility Bay. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. The program functioned on a strict 6-step system. Every liberty was taken away. We had to ask for permission to speak, stand, or even walk through a doorway. Moving up in the program earned privileges, but no one ever seemed to make it to the final level to graduate. Punishments were severe, and refusing orders resulted in being set back to the beginning of the program. That's how I found myself standing knee-deep in raw sewage, barefoot and barehanded, pulling grass because it had grown too long. The conditions were horrific. No hot water, no proper medical care, and barely edible food. Sand fleas and mosquitoes left us covered in bites, which often became infected. I developed an infection we called fat foot, where my foot and ankle swelled to double their size. I only got out after 12 months when my dad let me return home for soccer tryouts. My brother, who had also been sent there, came home 2 months later. The experience left lasting scars. I'm grateful to be free, but the memories will never leave me. Story 12. My grandpa retired early due to disability and spent summers watching me until I was old enough to stay alone. He spoiled me endlessly, amusement parks, toy stores, you name it. My parents told him to dial it back when I started acting entitled around age 6 or 7. One day, I asked Grandpa to take me to the amusement park. He explained that my parents had said no, but reassured me we could go another time. I got upset and, in a fit of manipulative childishness, started crying and accusing him of not loving me anymore. "Why don't you love me?" I kept repeating, watching him grow more and more distraught. Eventually, he started crying, saying, "Please don't say things like that." I made my 56-year-old grandpa cry, the kindest man I've ever known. At the time, I couldn't process what I'd done. I didn't even apologize. I just went to my room. He never told my parents. That moment stuck with me. My mom noticed that around then, I became quieter and more well-behaved. I treated Grandpa better from then on. Years later, when he was dying of cancer, I finally apologized. He didn't even remember the incident. He just laughed and said I shouldn't have dwelled on it for so long. I later learned he wasn't even biologically related to me. He was my mom's stepdad. But he was one of the best people I've ever known, and I owe so much of who I am to him. Story 13. This is a story of revenge. I've never told it before, but I still think I was justified. Years ago, I lived in Japan, where the English school business is huge. A friend of mine spent years developing his own curriculum and educational textbooks for kids. He was ready to launch his school, but needed financial backing. As a foreigner, incorporating a business in Japan is nearly impossible. He found a local businessman willing to invest. My friend put down $50,000, and the businessman put down $51,000, giving him controlling interest. At the last minute, the businessman backed out, effectively stealing my friend's $50,000 and launching the school himself using my friend's materials. The businessman didn't know I existed, so my friend suggested I apply for the head teacher position he advertised and sabotage the school from within. I got the job and spent 3 months preparing for the school's opening, setting up classrooms, creating schedules, organizing books and toys, installing software, and signing up students. 2 days before the opening, I enacted my revenge. I threw all the computers into a garbage bin, collected the next day, and changed all the passwords to the cloud services. Then I tossed my phone, disappeared, and cut all ties. Because the businessman insisted on paying me in cash, he had no bank information or legitimate address for me, only the fake one I provided. He had no way to track me down. I later heard that my actions cost him several $100,000. He had to refinance, missed the start of the school year, and lost all the parents who had signed up. He was never able to recover. I don't regret it for a second. He stole $50,000 from my friend, a young entrepreneur trying to start his business. He deserved every bit of it. And now I have a corporate saboteur backstory to boot. Story 14. When I was 13, I took a dump in my sister's cat's litter box. Here's the context. My sister was a terrible person to me growing up. She's 5 years older and was always the golden child. She got everything she wanted while I was quiet and kept to myself. She would take my underwear, get her period in them, and give them back stained just to spite me. I complained to my parents, but they just brushed it off. She continued to take my stuff, break it on purpose, and ruin my clothes. One day I had enough. She was scooping her cat's litter box while I begged her to give my stuff back. She ignored me completely, as usual. I got so mad that I saw red. As soon as she left the room, I looked at that litter box and thought, I'm going to make her clean my poop. So I did. And it wasn't just a little poop. It was the kind of monster that a 300-pound biker named Jim might have left behind. It was obviously not from her cat. I started to panic afterward, thinking I might have gone too far. But then I decided to stick to my plan. I waited days for her reaction, but nothing happened. No scream of horror, no vet visit for the cat's problem. She must have scooped it and I never said a word. She didn't stop tormenting me until she moved out 5 years later. But every time she did something awful, I thought about her scooping that poop, and it made things a little more bearable. Story 15. When I was about 8, my buddy and I were being watched by a neighbor, though that mostly meant we were left to our own devices. Somehow, we got our hands on several boxes of matchbooks and started building rockets out of aluminum foil and match heads. Once we ran out of supplies for rockets, we decided to have a match-flinging war. We'd rip the heads off matches, strike them on the covers, and fling them at each other. While chasing each other around the yard, we got near another neighbor's house, which had one of those roll-up wooden reed sunscreens. A match got stuck between the reeds and started smoldering. Within seconds, it grew to 1 inch, then 3 inches, then 6 inches, and before we knew it, the whole screen was on fire. We panicked and ran to get a garden hose, somehow managing to extinguish it with only half the screen burned. We thought we got away with it, until the fire department showed up. They quickly figured it out, pointing to our wet pant legs and ashes still on our shoes. The neighbor didn't press charges, but my dad paid for the damages and gave me a memorable punishment with his belt. Looking back, I don't resent him for it. That punishment, and the realization that we almost burned down someone's house, taught me an important lesson about how my actions can have serious consequences. Story 16. For my 21st birthday, I was celebrating at the shore and spent the whole day drunk. At one point, I went to the boardwalk to ride some attractions, but while waiting in line, I suddenly had to pee. I thought I was on the second pier where I knew the bathroom was, but I was actually on the third. Drunkenly, I wandered into the closed-off water park area of the pier, searching for a bathroom. Panicking and unable to hold it any longer, I decided to relieve myself in the lazy river. I felt bad but thought at least no one would see me. That's when a sky trolley came by overhead, full of people looking down at me mid-act. I froze, then quickly finished and ran back to my group, acting casual like nothing happened. Luckily, I wasn't caught, but I do feel bad for anyone who went to the water park the next day. Story 17. When I was a junior in college, I lived with some sorority sisters. One of them was dating my boyfriend's roommate, and the four of us were inseparable for about a year and a half. Their relationship was volatile and sometimes turned physical. One night after a party, my friend came to my room and told me she had been arrested for assault. She claimed her boyfriend had been beating and strangling her, so she punched him in self-defense. Someone saw the altercation and called the cops. Since she had no visible injuries, she was arrested. I supported her completely, attending court dates, acting as a character witness, cutting ties with my boyfriend's fraternity friends, which led to house vandalism, and filing reports with the college. My boyfriend and I both lost many friends over it. The following semester, she got back together with him. I was furious and felt betrayed after everything I had done for her. She later confessed she had lied about the abuse to get him in trouble. Things escalated when she ripped out some of his hair months later and was arrested again, making it clear the abuse might have been going the other way. I was crushed. Our sorority sisters sided with her, and I became depressed. During this time, she and my housemates got into selling drugs from our house, which terrified me as I was pursuing a teaching career. While waiting to find new housing, I found her iPad, which she had won in a school fundraiser. I impulsively sold it on eBay for $300. She never found out, and I've never told anyone until now. It felt like my way of getting justice after all the chaos she caused. Story 18. When I was in first grade, I bullied a classmate with autism and used to steal his lunch. He left the school after that year. I saw him again in fourth grade while grocery shopping with my mom. He was with his dad and was so happy to see me after 3 years. He hugged me and offered me a chocolate. I felt overwhelmed and refused the chocolate, apologizing for personal reasons. I didn't have the courage to apologize for bullying him, and I've regretted it ever since. I haven't bullied anyone else in my life and still don't know why I acted the way I did. I never physically hurt him but teased him in front of others and broke his water bottle multiple times. I hope he's doing well and has moved past the trauma I caused. To this day it haunts me, and I hope he's forgiven me. Story 19. In the 1990s, I hung out with some skinheads. Separate from them, I came across a store where the owner collected WW2 memorabilia, medals, patches, and items from various countries, including Germany. He was a kind, grandfatherly man who collected these items as a military enthusiast, not for political reasons. One day, I casually mentioned the store to some skinheads, including its name. A few weeks later, one of them walked into the store at closing time and murdered the owner and another worker. He fled but was eventually caught and convicted. I wasn't involved in the crime, nor was it my idea, but knowing I mentioned the store still haunts me. I left that scene immediately and am now a completely different person, far removed from racism or nationalist ideologies. This experience taught me how dangerous even casual associations with hate groups can be. It's something I'll never forgive myself for, even though I've worked hard to change and distance myself from that part of my life. Story 20. When I was younger, I witnessed a 6-year-old child pulled out of a pool after an apparent drowning. The laws where I live place full responsibility for a victim's well-being on the person who attempts to save them, including financial responsibility and liability for any mistakes. These laws are meant to prevent untrained individuals from causing more harm. I had only ever received a single first aid class about 7 years prior, and I didn't remember much. Even if I had tried to help, I might have done more harm than good. I'm clumsy and often don't measure my strength properly, which could have easily caused serious injury. As the child lay there, about 30-50 other people stood around crying and panicking, but none of us stepped forward to help. Someone called emergency services, but they arrived 20 minutes later, and by then the child had already passed away. This moment haunts me. I still wonder if I could have done something without making the situation worse, but I'll never know. Sharing this story helps me process the guilt, though I'll carry it with me forever. Story 21. When I was 17 or 18, I had a serious drinking problem. I made reckless decisions that could have cost me my life or the lives of others. I was struggling with PTSD and self-medicating, which is no excuse for what I did. One time I was drunk and driving in a parking lot. I backed into an SUV, breaking its headlight and possibly damaging the bumper, then drove away. I lied to my parents saying someone hit my car in the parking lot and used hot water to pop out the dent in my car so it wouldn't be noticeable. I'm 25 now and doing much better. I haven't driven drunk since high school and won't even get behind the wheel after one drink. But the guilt still eats at me. I wish I could find the person whose car I damaged and repay them for the trouble I caused. It was a horribly immature, irresponsible, and selfish act, and I'll always regret it. Story 22. About 10 years ago, I was newly divorced and started dating a very attractive but shy woman. One night, we went to a nice restaurant, and she wore a short dress that could have passed for lingerie. She wasn't from the US, so her idea of S was less conservative than what's typical in Texas. While we were at the bar, a snobby couple kept glancing at her, laughing and rolling their eyes at her outfit. It was incredibly rude, and I could tell it was making her feel self-conscious. As we were leaving, I noticed the man's chair was one of those tall bar chairs, and he was leaning far forward over it. On my way out, I hooked my leg around one of the chair legs and yanked it out from under him. He hit his chin on the bar and fell to the ground. A commotion broke out, and I crouched down, pretending to check on him. All I did was stare him down. I'm 6'2", and was in good shape at the time. He was neither. His wife started yelling, and the restaurant manager came over. I was a regular, so I addressed him by name and apologized, claiming it was an accident. I walked out, paid the valet, and went home with my date for an after-dinner drink. Story 23. My great aunt was a narcissist who always demanded attention. Whenever she felt ignored, she'd call my grandmother claiming she was sick, injured, or dying, just to get her and my mom to rush over. Once they arrived, she'd either berate them for not being at her beck and call or deliberately take medication to pass out. When I was in my early teens, my family planned a big, week-long vacation to the beach. Since we were pretty poor, this was a huge deal. We only managed to take a trip like this every few years. 2 days before we were set to leave, my great aunt found out about our plans. She pulled the same stunt, insisting she was on her deathbed. My grandmother rushed over, and I was furious. She had ruined so many other plans in the past, and I knew she was faking again. In my anger, I said to my mom, I swear to God, if she ruins this trip, she'd better be dying this time. Turns out, she actually died this time. I still cringe when I think about it. Story 24. When I was dating a girl before college, she gave me her childhood stuffed frog to take with me as a token of our relationship. During Christmas break, I found out she had cheated on me. I was devastated. She was remorseful and wanted to move past it, but I couldn't, so we broke up. After Christmas break, I returned to school and saw the stuffed frog on my pillow. Without thinking much, I tore its head off in anger. Years later, my current partner and I bought a stuffed bear as a housewarming gift, and it became a cherished part of our home. She also received her childhood stuffed puppy this past Christmas, and seeing her emotional reaction to it made me feel terrible. I realized that, despite my ex's betrayal, destroying the frog robbed her of future joy. Stuffed animals are important to many people, carrying memories and comfort into adulthood. It may sound silly, but at 43 years old, this is one of the worst things I've done, and I genuinely regret it. Story 25. Back when my wife and I were first married, I cheated on her. I was a reckless cokehead working at a nightclub, surrounded by opportunities for casual, no-strings-attached hookups. I saw other married guys doing the same thing, which made it seem okay to my self-centered 20-something self. I knew she'd be angry if she ever found out, but I underestimated the damage it would cause. When she discovered the truth, her devastation was beyond anything I'd imagined. She was completely broken and inconsolable. Seeing her cry, tear her hair out, and sink into depression made me feel guilt and shame on a level I'd never experienced. We divorced, but a year later we remarried. That was around 2002, and we've been together ever since. Our marriage is now strong, and we have kids. I've never even thought about cheating again. Story 26. When I was in college, one of my roommates sublet her room for the summer. One day, while I was doing a big load of laundry, I left the apartment door unlocked as usual since I was frequently going up and down the stairs. The sublet roommate saw me multiple times, so it was obvious I was doing laundry. On one trip back, I found the door locked. I knocked and rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. My keys were in my room, so I had to go to the main office to borrow a key fob, which cost me $100. This wiped out my food budget for the month. Annoyed and feeling disrespected, I went to the sublet roommate's room, found it unlocked, and stole her iPod. I sold it to make up for the money I lost, plus a little extra. She never apologized for locking me out, nor did she ever mention the missing iPod. Story 27. At a small backyard party, I took acid without telling anyone. Later, someone needed a ride to get cigarettes, and despite having been drinking and tripping, I volunteered to drive. On the way, I drove recklessly, hitting nearly 100 miles per hour on a busy road. On the way back, I was speeding through neighborhood streets at around 60 miles per hour. When I tried to take a sharp right turn, I lost control of the car. The car skidded, dragged along the slanted grass hill of a nearby yard, and came to a stop with the bumper ripped off. Miraculously, I managed to park near the curb, and my passenger was unharmed. The noise from the crash, the stereo blasting at full volume, and the screeching tires caused a commotion. Thankfully, the homeowner was out of town, or I likely would have faced jail time. After making sure everyone was okay, I walked straight to my parents' house, woke my mom, and confessed that I damaged her car. She told me we'd deal with it in the morning and went back to bed. I returned to the party and kept going. To this day, I'm grateful no one was hurt and that I avoided serious consequences. I often think about how lucky I was that night. Story 28. About 12 years ago, I was dating this girl, and we were at a bonfire at her house with a group of friends and her two brothers. We were all in our early to mid-20s and drinking heavily. At some point, I went inside to use the bathroom but came back outside completely naked. There was a cheap above-ground pool about 30 feet from the fire, near where the girl I was dating was standing. Drunk and uninhibited, we ended up having S in the pool while our friends and her brothers were fully aware of what was happening. Afterward, my drunken self decided it'd be a good idea to jump over the bonfire a few times, still naked. Then I saw her younger brother sitting in a chair. For reasons unknown to sober me, I walked up behind him, slapped him across the face with my member, and said, "That was just in your sister." I had no memory of this the next morning and had to be told about everything that happened. To this day, I don't drink tequila straight anymore. Story 29. In college, I had two roommates I grew to hate. Initially, everything was great. It was our senior year, and the three of us, me, M, a guy, and a girl, got along well. We helped each other with homework, watched TV together, and partied on weekends. About 3 months in, the guy got dumped by his girlfriend. 2 weeks later, he and the girl started hooking up constantly, and it turned into a 2-against-1 dynamic where I was overruled on everything. Not long after that, they both dropped out of school, right before finals of our senior year. They stayed in the house, working part-time jobs, and started selling drugs to make more money. Not weed, but cocaine and pharmaceuticals. This led to constant arguments. By summer, when we only had about 2 months left on the lease, a close friend of mine passed away. I was one of the people who found the body, and I came home devastated, asking my roommates for a few days of peace. Naturally, they responded by inviting friends over, partying all night, and then leaving the house trashed before heading out camping for a week. When I called the girl to complain, her response was, "That's not my problem." So I retaliated. I threw out everything of theirs in the living room, including $3,000 worth of cocaine the guy had left on the table. As for the girl, she was obsessed with her hair and spent hundreds of dollars a month on products. With a friend's help, I got into the bathroom and we sabotaged every single one of her hair products, peeing in them, smearing unmentionable things into her conditioner, and so on. Before I did all this, I took photos of the trashed house and sent them to the landlord. By the time they got back, I had already moved out. The guy later threatened me over text, so I showed it to a cop. The cop and I took a picture together, which I sent back to him. He replied with, "Snitches get stitches." That was 20 years ago, and it still makes me laugh. Story 30. I've been in recovery from IV hero addiction for a little over 14 years now. But the most messed up thing I've ever done happened in the summer of 2008, when I was still deep in my addiction. At the time, I was 25, 26 years old and living with my parents because I was unable to hold steady employment or live independently. My hero habit had consumed me, and I was spending around $100 a day just to stave off withdrawal. My parents knew about my addiction, but were often in denial about the extent of it. I constantly lied, borrowed money I couldn't pay back, and stole from my family. One night in August, I was dope sick and desperate. My mom had $140 hidden in her purse, and my dad had $40 in his wallet. I planned to take $60, hoping they wouldn't notice right away, and sneak out to meet a friend to buy Hero. I pushed my car down the street in neutral to avoid waking my parents and headed out. By the time I returned home, my parents were still asleep on the couch. I thought I was in the clear, but by the next morning, I was already starting to feel the creeping withdrawal symptoms again. That's when I hatched a new, even more elaborate plan. In the early hours of the morning, I stole everything I could find. My mom's entire wallet, both of my parents' cigarette cartons, and even their checkbook. I emptied the medicine cabinet to make it look like someone had ransacked it and unlocked a side door, leaving a spare key in the lock to stage a fake robbery. At 4 a.m., I woke my parents and told them we'd been robbed. I even planted suspicion on an ex-girlfriend who also struggled with addiction, claiming she and her new boyfriend might be involved. The police came, and one of the officers was a high school classmate of mine. It was humiliating, but my desperation overrode any shame. After they left, I waited for my parents to start their day, then took my stolen bounty and went out to buy more hero. I threw my mom's wallet into the woods near a hiking trail and stashed the cigarettes in my car. By noon, I was broke and dopeless again. This wasn't sustainable, and it all came crashing down. My parents eventually searched my room and found needles, drug paraphernalia, and evidence of my addiction. They kicked me out, and I moved in with a friend who tragically died of an overdose 2 months later. That friend's death was a wake-up call. On November 4th, 2008, I finally entered treatment and began my recovery journey. I confessed everything to my parents while in treatment. They told me later that the police had wanted to question me further about the robbery, but my dad managed to intervene. Since getting clean, I've gone back to school for graduate training in social work and public health. I've spent over a decade working with people struggling with addiction and homelessness. Losing friends, cousins, and patients to fentanyl has been heartbreaking, but I've also had the privilege of witnessing countless recoveries. I deeply regret the pain I caused my parents and everyone who cared about me, but I've worked hard to make amends and channel my experiences into helping others. I firmly believe the opposite of addiction isn't just sobriety. It's human connection. Through connection, we recover. So that's the most messed up thing I've ever done. Also, screw hero. Story 31. My first job after high school was at UPS, where I worked with a coworker who was kind of a friend. He had a history of being in prison and had this intense, intimidating stare. I never really maintained eye contact with him for long, but I didn't judge him for his past. One day, while unloading a truck together, he had a necklace with a capsule attached to it. He told me to turn around and not watch, and when I turned back, he was sniffing like he had just done something. He joked about it and asked if I wanted to try. I wasn't really sure, but I gave it a shot. At first, nothing happened. Then I took a bit more and rubbed it on my gums, and suddenly I felt superhuman. I started tearing through packages at an insane speed. It was my first experience with a stimulant other than coffee. Looking back, I don't mess with substances like that anymore because I care about my brain and physical health. Now, I only drink occasionally or vape. But that first job experience is something I'll never forget. Story 32. When my daughter was a newborn, I was completely sleep deprived. I was breastfeeding every 2 hours and terrified of rolling over on her while she slept in my bed, which meant I barely moved and got terrible sleep. At the same time, our elderly diabetic dog needed to go outside every 2 hours as well. Baby and dog were on alternating schedules, and I was beyond exhausted. One night, after feeding my daughter and lying down, I heard the dog make her usual noise, asking to go out. Frustrated and half asleep, I yelled, "Will you just die already?" The dog paused, then got up and walked to the door like usual. I let her out, and everything seemed fine for a few hours. Later that day, I noticed she was struggling to stand after squatting. She couldn't get back up. My husband had just come home, and he helped her, but it was clear she was in pain. We took her to the vet, who advised us to put her to sleep due to her deteriorating condition. I told the dog to die, and she did. To this day, more than 20 years later, I regret saying those words. It was one of the worst things I've ever done, and the guilt has never left me. Story 33. At my first job, there was a manager who was a nightmare, a bully, and a serial harasser of young women. He was the epitome of an old-school oppressive boss. Unfortunately, he was also the brother of a powerful politician, so no one dared to challenge him directly. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I began moving his things around, hiding them in random places where he'd eventually find them. I created a fake project, which he ended up discussing in an executive meeting, embarrassing himself when the shareholders had no idea what he was talking about. I tampered with the dates and times on his devices, altered his work diary, and subtly gaslit him into thinking he was losing his mind. Knowing his family had a history of dementia, I played on that fear. It worked. Over the course of 7 months, he became so shaken and mentally unstable that he had a minor breakdown and retired completely. While I know what I did was deeply unethical and manipulative, I don't regret it. His behavior was monstrous, and during those 7 months, he stopped harassing women and bullying employees. The world is better off with him locked up in his McMansion, far away from any workplace. Story 34. When I was 11, my mom shipped me off to live with my dad in Florida unannounced. While my dad welcomed me, his wife wasn't thrilled. Being insecure in a new environment, I sought my dad's attention, which made his wife jealous. Over time, she became controlling and verbally abusive, accusing me of being inappropriate with male friends, even though we were just kids hanging out. One summer, I started my period before a trip to a water park. I wasn't allowed to use tampons, but the school nurse taught me how to use them safely, allowing me to enjoy the trip. Weeks later, my dad's wife noticed I hadn't needed pads that month. She confronted me angrily, throwing her empty coffee cup at my headboard. When I explained, she made wild accusations about my behavior. My dad stepped in to stop her, but the damage was done. The next morning, while my dad was at work, she punished me by cutting my waist-length hair to my earlobe. My dad was furious when he found out, but it was too late. Feeling vengeful, I emptied half her shampoo bottle and replaced it with Nair. While it didn't completely bald her, it caused noticeable bald spots and breakage. Looking back as an adult, I feel guilty about it now. But at the time, it felt like I was taking justice into my own hands. Story 35. When I was 22, I loved walking naked through the woods in Florida, embracing nature and pretending to be a wild animal. One particularly humid morning, I was enjoying my solitude when I heard a group of people crashing through the brush, laughing and smacking sticks against trees. Curious, I caked myself in mud and dirt, stalking closer to them. It was a group of 3 teenagers, 2 boys and 1 girl, smoking weed and chatting loudly. I decided to have some fun. I got close behind a log, stood up suddenly, and let out a loud, guttural screech like something out of a horror movie, pointing at them. They dropped everything and ran. One of the boys tripped and hit his face on a rock with a loud crack. His groaning sobs snapped me out of my prank, but his friends had already bolted. Panicking, I ran back to my car without even grabbing my clothes and drove off. To this day, I deeply regret not helping the injured kid. It was a stupid and reckless thing to do, and the memory still haunts me. Story 36. When I was 17 and in basic training for the British Army, we went to Cornwall for some adventure training, which included climbing, abseiling, and rope work. One day, we trained on cliffs overlooking a sea inlet. 2 ropes stretched between cliffs about 20 meters apart, with the waves 50 meters below. One rope was for the crossing, and the other was a safety line clipped to our harnesses in case we fell. We were practicing crossing the gap while pulling our kits and learning to regain the rope if we fell and were left hanging. It was exhausting work. At one point, the instructor, in what can only be described as a moment of recklessness, decided to demonstrate the crossing and a regain without using the safety line. Had he fallen, it would have been fatal. At the time, we thought it was legendary behavior. He climbed up the other side, grinning, and announced, "Crate for anyone who does that." A crate of beer was the unofficial currency in the Army for dares, favors, and screw-ups. Before he could finish his sentence, I was on the rope, crossing without the safety line. I completed the regain and climbed up the other side. Instead of the congratulations I expected, the instructor punched me in the chest and yelled that I almost put him in a prison. He did by the crate, but back at the main camp, I got a severe dressing down from NCOs and officers who made it clear how reckless and stupid I had been. Now that I'm 41, I look back on moments like this and realize how incredibly close I came to serious harm. It scares me 100 times more now than it did at the time. Story 37. Survivor's guilt has haunted me more than any other mistake in my life. My sister committed suicide while at university. We all knew she was struggling, my family, the university, but after spring break, we let her go back. I have a vivid memory of the moment I should have spoken up and said, "No, she can't go back." I stayed silent. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I didn't get to say goodbye, give her a hug, or tell her how much I cared. She left, and then she died. We later took the university to court for their failure to provide adequate psychological support, and they were found guilty of causing psychological damage that contributed to her death. Since then, my family has worked to establish better mental health care for students in the UK, including petitions for legislative changes. A judge ruled that universities don't currently have a legal duty of care for students, which we're trying to change. I hope the lives saved through this work can honor her memory and provide some solace for the loss. but I will always regret not raising my voice when it could have saved her. Story 38. One time in second grade, I made a crude drawing of the Loch Ness Monster. During gym class, I left it in the coach's seat while we ran laps. When I got back, it was gone. Furious, I stepped on a kid's fingers because I thought he stole it. It was a windy, overcast day, and as usual, our coach took us outside to the playground. Before we started laps, I carefully placed my folded drawing on her seat, hopeful it wouldn't blow away. After the run, I returned, hunched over for breath, and discovered it was gone. Distraught, I refused to believe the wind had taken it. My brain latched onto the idea that someone had stolen it. My prime suspect, Trent, a classmate of mine. I hunted him down and found him hanging from the grate of the playset. Like an angry lion, I growled for an answer. When he denied the crime, I pounced. Ignoring his cries, I pressed my foot on his fingers. The coach pulled me away and dragged me back to her seat. Then, as class was ending, Trent shocked me. He came over with my drawing in hand. I thought, holy crap, I was right. The coach scolded him and he got into trouble. But then Trent explained himself. He had taken the drawing to keep it from blowing away. I was horrified. Instead of listening to reason, I had gone on a witch hunt, hurt my classmate, and caused him to get in trouble. Guilt consumed me, so I went to Trent, apologized, and let him keep the drawing to make amends. I hadn't thought about this moment until last year, and it reminded me how childish I was. Even now as an adult, I sometimes face the choice between being the spiteful child or the calm, collected adult. Every day I try to choose the latter. Story 39. When I was about 9, my mom brought out her old BB rifles for my brother and me to play with in the yard. At first, we shot at glass bottles, but eventually I started hunting birds. One day I hit a bird through the heart, just as it was taking off. I felt so accomplished, and my mom was impressed with my quick aim. But being an animal lover, she didn't want the bird's death to be meaningless. She suggested feeding it to our outdoor cat. The cat wouldn't touch it, though, likely because she only ate live prey. My mom was disappointed that the bird had died for nothing but thanked me for trying to give its death a purpose. We ended up burying it in the backyard. A few days later, I went back to the BB rifle. Shooting still targets had gotten boring, so I hunted birds again. This time, I killed 3 and collected them. Remembering my mom's words about not letting animals die in vain, my 9-year-old logic decided I should use their feathers for art projects. I pinned the birds up on our clothesline to dry them out so I could collect the feathers later. But after a day, I got bored waiting. For reasons I can't explain, I spray-painted the birds gold. The sight was bizarrely artistic. Gold-painted birds hanging in the summer sun. The next day, they were gone. I assumed some wild animal took them and didn't mind the metallic spray paint. Story 40. About 15 years ago, I was staying with my girlfriend, who was always ready for intimate moments, which was great for me. One day, I had the day off while she was at work. In the middle of the day, I needed to take the Browns to the Super Bowl, if you know what I mean. It ended up being one of those messy ones where you feel like you're wiping a brown marker. Just endless. Rather than waste an entire roll of toilet paper, I decided to shower and clean up. However, I realized there were no clean towels. So I started a load of laundry and waited for it to finish before I could shower. To my surprise, my girlfriend got off work early and came home. She immediately wanted to get frisky. She literally pushed me onto the couch, pulled my boxers down, and started going to town. I clenched as hard as I could, but after she finished and headed to the bedroom, I stood up and saw it, a brown streak on her beige couch cushion. Panic set in. Acting on instinct, I flipped the cushion over and hoped for the best. She never mentioned it, but to this day I still get flashbacks about that streak. Story 41. During a mission in Iraq, we were targeting an HVT, high-value target, at night. We breached the door and rushed in. A 20-year-old came running into the hallway, wielding an AK-47 and wearing a suicide vest. We had no choice but to shoot him. After neutralizing the threat, we continued clearing the house, quickly finding and apprehending the HVT before he was even out of bed. As we brought him out, the lights in the house were on. The HVT saw his dead son lying in the hallway. He collapsed in tears, wailing as we pulled him outside. What struck me was the twisted irony. If his son had successfully detonated the vest, killing us all, the man wouldn't have shed a tear. Yet now, stepping over his son's body, he was inconsolable. Because of the vest, the family wasn't allowed to bury the son immediately, as is customary in Islamic culture. The EOD team needed to safely remove the vest first. In their eyes, this delay was an additional insult. This experience revealed the depth of both evil and brainwashing. Who knows how long that boy had been sleeping in a suicide vest? It wasn't uncommon for HVTs to keep their sons or even themselves ready to detonate at a moment's notice. It was a grim reminder of the twisted ideologies and manipulation we encountered. Story 42. I cold emailed a brain surgeon, asked for brain surgery, and actually got it. None of the doctors I had seen believed that the pineal gland cyst in my brain was responsible for my ever-worsening symptoms. At one point, UCLA Medical Center basically forced me to see a highly esteemed mental health doctor in Newport Beach, California. I went, and after the doctor finished interviewing me, he spoke privately with my father. Years later, I learned what that doctor had told him. "From a mental health standpoint, I don't see anything wrong with your son," he said bluntly. "What?" my dad exclaimed, completely baffled. He tried to explain all the hospitals I'd been to and how UCLA had referred me there. "From a mental standpoint, I see nothing wrong with your son at all," the doctor reiterated, standing firm. After that, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I emailed a brain surgeon in Los Angeles, explaining who I was, my symptoms, why I believed I needed surgery, and asked if he could help. 10 hours later, his office called me. I couldn't believe it. They told me he had read my email, printed it out, and wanted me to send in my CT scans and MRIs. I sent them over, and after reviewing them, the surgeon's office called back to tell me he thought I was a candidate for surgery and invited me in for a consultation. At the consultation, the surgeon realized I wasn't like some of the other patients he'd seen who had no clue what they were getting into. I was well informed, and after independent doctors at Cedars-Sinai concurred, he agreed to perform the surgery. I didn't tell my dad until a week before the surgery. When I asked if he could drive me, he freaked out, thinking I'd lost my mind. "I want to talk to this guy," he demanded. "Dad," I said, "the surgery is already scheduled for 7 a.m. next Wednesday. I've been evaluated and approved by the surgeon and his team." Begrudgingly, he agreed to drive me. The day before the surgery, my uncle, Dad's brother, passed away, so another family member ended up taking me to the hospital. The surgery fixed everything: my involuntary muscle spasms, insomnia, visual disturbances, acid reflux, you name it. None of the doctors I'd seen before thought the surgery would fix any of my problems. But I went rogue, and it worked. Recovery took longer than expected due to complications, but my surgeon assured me I'd make a full recovery within a year. Other doctors overseeing my recovery thought his optimism was misplaced. On the 1-year anniversary of my brain surgery, I went skydiving and emailed those doubting doctors a picture of me mid-freefall, giving 2 thumbs up. Going rogue for brain surgery and then skydiving was pretty wild, but it fixed all my symptoms and made me incredibly happy. Totally worth it. Story 43. I've shared this story before, but it never gets old. It's the last story I ever told my dad, the last time I made him laugh. While it makes me sad to remember, it also makes me smile because I can still hear his laughter. Back in February 2014, my dad was having heart problems and needed tests at a local hospital. We all knew it was serious, so I made arrangements to be there early in the morning. The night before, a big down comforter we washed tore apart, scattering feathers everywhere. We did another load of laundry afterward, which only made things worse. The next morning, I grabbed clothes from the dryer, shook off the feathers, and headed out. Running late and starving, I stopped by McDonald's and wolfed down 2 Egg McMuffins on the way. By the time I got to the hospital, my stomach was making ominous noises, and my underwear felt off. Something was clearly wrong. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I knew I needed a bathroom, immediately. Every step made the pressure worse, and I was doing the walk. Finally, I found a restroom, but it was out of order. A nurse pointed me toward another bathroom, a single handicapped stall. Thankfully, it was unoccupied. I rushed in, locked the door, and barely managed to pull my pants down in time. Feathers from my underwear fell onto the floor and into the toilet as I hovered over it. What followed was an unstoppable torrent of liquefied McDonald's diarrhea, unleashed before I even fully sat down. It was chaos, but eventually, I was done. Once I cleaned up, I looked around and realized the damage. Feathers were everywhere, on the floor, in the toilet, even falling out of my shirt. Combined with the mess I'd made, it looked like someone had shat out a goose and then put it in a blender. I stood there, almost admiring the disaster, and thought, if I walked in and saw this, I'd wonder forever what happened. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I left it. I didn't flush. I left everything, feathers, toilet paper, for the next person to find and wonder about for the rest of their life. That night, I told the story to my dad. He was really down because he just found out he needed triple bypass surgery. But when I told him this story, he laughed and laughed. It was so much funnier in person than on paper. That was the last time I saw him. 2 days later on my birthday, he had a massive heart attack in his driveway and died. It's bittersweet to remember that moment, but I'll always cherish his laughter and the memory of the last story I ever told him. Story 44. I was a monster to my childhood dog. As a very young kid, I had a decent relationship with him, but he was mostly attached to my mom. He was a one-human dog, and I grew jealous. My parents decided to get another dog that I could claim as mine. In my childish mind, it made sense. My mom could have the first dog, and I'd bond with the new one. But we all lived in the same house, and instead of strengthening my relationship with my first dog, I gave up on him entirely. As I grew into my tween and teen years, I became mentally unwell and went in and out of hospitals for anger issues. When my dog annoyed me, I would yell at him or, on rare occasions, hurt him. The worst memory I have is slamming a door into him. I'd been busy with something, and he wanted to come back inside after peeing. Frustrated, I yelled and flung the door open hard without realizing he was right in front of it. It hit him and launched him back. That visual is permanently seared into my memory. My therapists tell me I was just a kid and didn't fully understand my actions, but I don't see that as an excuse. My dog rarely gave me affection, and he was right not to. In his later years, I got the help I needed and worked to be a better owner. He started to warm up to me, but he remained distant. He passed away of old age a few years ago, and I don't think he ever truly forgave me. Honestly, I don't believe I deserved his forgiveness. My parents say we always had a good relationship, but I think they're just trying to make me feel better, or maybe they're right and I'm just remembering it all wrong. My memory isn't the best. All I know for sure is that no animal deserves to be treated like that. Story 45. Back in the late 90s, I lived on the 5th floor of a brownstone in the city. My roommate had an overripe mango sitting in the fridge, and it didn't make sense to throw it in the trash since it might attract fruit flies. But I wasn't about to carry it down 5 flights of stairs to the dumpster either. I was too lazy. There wasn't a screen on my bedroom window, and since I was stoned, I got the brilliant idea to toss the mango out the window. It's all organic material, right? Not really littering. It was 20 below and rush hour. The street below was packed with brake lights as commuters tried to escape the city. I intended for the mango to land harmlessly in the empty parking lot across the street. Instead, it arced in an impossible trajectory and exploded on the back window of someone's car with the most sickening thud. All I saw was their brake lights come on. Panicked, I dove to the floor and belly crawled out of my room. To this day, I can't imagine the frozen tropical mess they had to clean up. I bet they cried. I bet I ruined their day. And I bet they're still wondering where the hell that mango came from. Story 46. The worst thing I ever did was take my brother's mistress to his 20-year wedding anniversary party. My brother's mistress was my best friend since grade school. We stayed close through high school and college, and she knew my brother well. She also knew what kind of person he was. Charming, but a liar and a cheater. Somehow, despite all of this, she fell for him. I didn't know about their relationship at first because they kept it a secret from me. I only found out when she started taking an unusual interest in my niece, my brother's daughter. When I questioned her about it, she finally confessed that she and my brother were together. She claimed that my brother and his wife were separated, seeking a divorce, and that they were going to get married once it was finalized. I told her that he was lying, but she didn't believe me. She even accused me of trying to sabotage their relationship. We argued and didn't speak for weeks. I realized she wouldn't believe me until she saw the truth for herself. So, I called her to apologize and invited her to a family gathering a week later. When she arrived, she realized it was my brother and his wife's 20-year wedding anniversary party. She was stunned to see them acting lovey-dovey and happy together. That's when it hit her. He'd been lying to her the whole time. She was furious with me for setting her up like that, but it was the only way I could get her to see the truth.